Great, thank you for that introduction, and thank you to everyone who's logged on from all over the world here today. This is a lot of fun. I'm going to jump right in because we've got kind of nice short sessions here. My name is Adam Brindell. I've got my contact information here on the slides. I'm @Brind at Twitter, and if you add on the mastodon.xyz, that's where I live on Mastodon. I know you're here to learn about data engineering and machine learning and not about me, so I won't talk about myself a bunch, but I've worked with a lot of data engineering and ML tools lately. I've been coding kind of forever because I'm one of those people, for better or worse. I've worked with a lot of the big tech companies, but also in a lot of other sectors, which sometimes we call the real economy, outside of tech, so things like retail and banking and energy and so on. The slides here are mine, so you can blame me for the poor design. And the art is courtesy of Stable Diffusion, so that should be fun. I opened up Twitter on January 1, so New Year's this year, and I saw this meme, right? And I think everybody here kind of, you get the meme right away, right? This is why it's a meme. It's why it's so funny. And we also kind of feel this pain because we know that this represents kind of a problem. But maybe it's just a joke, right? There aren't really that many. Well, maybe there are, right? This is a list of tools, and all of these are actually pretty important tools. Maybe not 600 of them. And then you've got things like this. And don't worry, my eyesight isn't good enough to read all of these logos either. And some of these are maybe tools that are coming from other sectors. But I think we all get this feeling about the swirl of tools that we need to work with, that we need to support, and that are coming down the pike, right? So there's lots of tools. We have a discipline that suffers a little bit from gear acquisition syndrome. So this is something that's famous among artists, sometimes where there's a focus on shiny tools over skills, and a lot of times the experts will say to the folks who are getting started, the new camera is not going to help your photography as much as using the camera you have more effectively. And so there's maybe a lesson in there. We need to adopt and support these tools, and that makes it hard to hire, retain, and grow teams. We also know that there's this strange situation where there's a huge number of junior data scientists struggling to get into the industry, not really able to do it, and what seems like a shortage of senior data scientists and engineers. There may not be actually a shortage there, but it feels like a shortage because there are few with the process and business experience that you might feel like you need, and there might be few that you feel like you can find and hire, right? And the end result is kind of what you'd expect, right? So we know that about 85%, maybe a little bit lower, but almost 85% of machine learning related projects fail. Half of them never make it to production, right? So if you do the arithmetic, that means 70% of the ones that do make it to production still fail, right? Either functionally or they fail to deliver business value. Now, some firms say, well, AI is higher risk. We're not up to that yet. We're just doing data processing. But really, these things are kind of, they share a trend that we're going to look at today, right? So the joke here is that, yeah, Southwest was just doing data processing over the holidays. That didn't work out well for a huge number of travelers in the United States. And the FAA, that's the American Aviation Authority, they ended up grounding all of the flights in the entire United States just a few mornings ago when one of their data systems failed. So those are kind of dramatic examples, but every single day we lose productivity when the specs for what we want, we can't implement, right? So if you think about how many interactions you have with firms or firms have with each other, because the business rules and the contracts are not actually implemented in the systems, right? So your business rule says A, your contract says A+1, and then the data system does X, Y, Z, and you need to resolve that. So that's the source of huge inefficiencies. So this talk is not focused on tech companies. So if you're here from a pure tech company, I'm glad you're here, that's great. Your situation may be a little bit different from what I'm talking about though. I'm focused specifically on large or enterprise companies today that are not explicitly delivering technology. So we don't think of tech as being their first order product, but they're using data to deliver products or services. So, this is pretty much most of the economy: airlines, banks, chain restaurants, pharma, agriculture, logistics, government organizations. If you're thinking you're already bored and you might want to run for the exit, I guess this isn't a physical conference, so you can't actually get up and leave. But here's the TLDR, and then we'll get into a little bit more detail. But the short version is enterprises have succeeded by hiring and managing employees as interchangeable commoditized items for over a century. There are historical reasons for that. We'll see some of that. And in some roles that might work. I'm not saying it does or doesn't, but I do know that in data engineering and data science, it does not work, and we'll see why. Of course, we want to increase the success of data engineers, data scientists, the firms they work at, and the projects they build. So some of the recommendations we're going to look at are decommodifying cutting edge data roles to create more effectiveness, which sounds a little bit like jargon, but what we basically mean is focusing more on almost a startup approach of getting things done and kind of eliminating some operations and processes that may seem efficient, but are actually hurting us. But then we might lose some efficiency. We're going to recapture that, because if we can apply the data products like models, we can get back more than any efficiency we might give up. And we want to see how we can grow great teams easier than we can hire them. So some of the things we want to escape from, legacy traps, I've called them. If you see this, you're probably groaning and like, yeah, we've all had to deal with this. So bureaucratic application processes, for hiring, lots of levels of automated services and filtering, compensation bands that serve purposes other than hiring and retention, right? So in theory, the compensation bands should be more connected to hiring, retention, performance, but we know that there's lots of reasons where that can get really Byzantine and problematic, and it doesn't help. Extra interview rounds, cat and mouse qualification games. We figure out what we think people are supposed to know, and then they play games to kind of meet that hurdle. And we're not actually sorting well to find people that have the skills that we want. So things like hiring based on tools, not focusing on growth, not investing in that. And remember, a lot of the people that you really want to hire are avoiding this entire process. So there's this cliche that the folks that you really want, they're never applying for jobs. They're kind of moving from one job to another, getting directly recruited in. So it's not really as effective as you might think, right? So in the end, we end up sometimes with largish teams, often ineffectual, misaligned to business needs, ill-equipped for a technological change, where the best performers are often hostages or planning their escape. And Stable Diffusion here gave me this neat illustration where I think that's kind of like someone escaping from the tower by dangling a bed sheet over the balcony, and they're going to escape. But it's not our fault. So how did we get here? We got here over a long period of time. So don't worry, this won't be a long history lesson, but a short one, right? Agriculture, if you want more food, it used to be that you needed a lot more people. Early industry, we have some innovation with specialization, interchangeable parts, but we're still scaling with people, right? If you want twice as many nails or guns or tools, you need twice as many people. Then we get machinery, right? That helps somewhat, but the problem is, each person is more productive with the machinery, but the problem is one person can only supervise so many machines. There's some bounded ratio between the people and the tools, so you still need more people if you want more product. And where things really start to get strange is when we get into information work at large scale, so in the 20th century. So for a while, information work seems to kind of follow this pattern a little bit. Like if you want to do more accounting, like you've got a much bigger enterprise, you probably need more accountants, right? Even if they have some software, something like that, you still need more. If you want more sales, maybe you need more salesmen, and so on. And so that starts to seem like there might be some question there, but that model still persists. In the 1980s to the 2000s, things start to get rocky. We start to see software innovation coming from really small teams, startups, that are just wildly disruptive and more effective than enterprise software techniques. Enterprises can't really deal with that, but they want some of the productivity. So sometimes they'll outsource projects to take advantage of that dynamic, but they can't really integrate it into their internal models because it just doesn't play nice with this 20th century approach, right? So you can't, imagine taking like a very small high performance software startup, and you've probably had this experience, you can't really just bring them into a large enterprise and manage them in the same way. It messes up, or I shouldn't say messes up, but it makes it challenging to manage budgets and compensation. Hiring and retention we're talking about extensively. It's just a whole different set of patterns that you need. Risk management, that's an ongoing challenge, right? This idea that you have a small number of people that the whole enterprise may depend on. And a lot of companies, that makes them very uneasy. We don't want to have, a situation where 2-3 people suddenly something happens and they need to separate from the company and it cripples our ability to function. But here's the thing, we'll see that companies do tolerate that at the executive level. So there is a mechanism for this. It's just not something they're used to doing at the individual contributor level. And of course, scaling and growth, this misconception that maybe if we want to scale and grow, we need to scale and grow the team linearly somehow, right? And companies kind of push back against this by trying to emulate 20th century patterns in software and systems engineering. So what they tried to do was find processes where they could decontextualize the work, so kind of break it up into little isolated pieces that's not holistic and doesn't interact with the rest of the system. And if they can get it so that engineers can write modules or pieces in isolation, adjust features in small increments, fix small bugs, basically follow some kind of routine, then they can kind of pretend it's still 1970, and that if they want more functionality for the firm, they can just hire more coders, right? That's kind of a famous, it's kind of a famous model. It's been kind of made fun of in pop culture a lot. And we all know the result of that, right? It's we interact with that every day. You get exactly kind of what you expect here, which is you get a bunch of isolated pieces that don't work well together, and it's really hard to accomplish substantial things. And if that wasn't bad enough, in the 2010s, when big data and data engineering become critical, it just breaks the model completely. You start getting tools like Hadoop and Cassandra and Spark that are very powerful, but they're really sophisticated, right? So you can take the things you're trying to do, like build reports or data transformations, and kind of spread those over employees. That works. But the problem is that the knowledge that you need to be effective with the tools, you can't split that up. It's not like one person can know just this one area of the tool to do one piece of the job, and someone else can do something else. Each employee that uses the tool has to have a high skill level with it, or else the performance of the whole thing runs very, very badly. I'm trying to, in this talk, avoid telling any specific industry stories because I don't want to point the finger at any particular firms or industries, and also it doesn't, anecdotes don't really prove anything. But there are just constant situations that I come across where not having a specific skill level or ability to kind of analyze what's going on, that gets in the way of performance. So that in some cases, many orders of magnitude. It's not uncommon to have a 10x or 100x improvement in how some of these processes can work if we can get folks kind of to the right skill level there. Now, luckily, each employee can generate lots of output. So once you have folks that are really good in these particular areas, they can accomplish a huge amount. So the scaling limit isn't the number of employees, but it's kind of the in-house ability level that you can cultivate. And this situation is, of course, emphasized with machine learning, right? So in simple terms, ML models succeed if they can produce good business outcomes. We don't want a lot of mediocre models. What we want is 1 or 2 really good models, right? And the efficiency is built into deploying the model against the business process and the data. So we get near infinite scaling, right? So if we have a great model that processes transactions in some business and optimizes profits, we can make lots of money. Or conversely, like we saw last year with the real estate iBuyers, they had 1 or 2 models that really weren't great and drove most of them out of business. I mean, they lost money, and this was before global inflation and interest rate changes kind of moved the real estate market. So even in kind of the optimal real estate setting, a poor model can drive you completely out of the business, which happened for a few folks. So lots of leverage and lots at stake. We said this is something that enterprises tolerate at the senior executive level. It may not be comfortable, right? Boards and it may not be completely happy with the risk they're taking with certain particular individuals in certain particular positions, but it is something that we've learned to live with. Companies don't do that at the IC level, but they can, right? We can learn to live with that. So I've told lots of really scary stories at this point. Let's talk about what we can do to make things better, right? I think that's why we're all here, right? not just to complain. It's too early, at least in California time, to just be complaining. So the first thing we want to do, it's really the magic is to develop a critical mission thought process around data engineering and machine learning, right? And historically, these things were information processing was typically considered kind of a cost overhead, and there's still lots of legacy thinking out there around this, but that's not how things are today, right? Today, getting this stuff right is just as important for your humans, meaning your employees, your investors, your customers, and other firms or organizations, as flying an airplane, performing surgery, or arguing a lawsuit. So treat it that way. Think about, would this be a reasonable process if I thought I was going to be involved in a lot of litigation? Is this how I would find attorneys to represent me? If it feels like, oh, that's very different, well, think about whether it's different and how. And when you go to hire, look for people suited to your long-term needs, right? And we'll talk about kind of junior and senior folks there, accessible to your business. So one of the wonderful things, well, about remote work, but really even without remote work, since firms are spread throughout the world, is there is enormous talent in almost every location, right? So we don't need to be worrying about Silicon Valley tech trends. We don't need to be worrying about hiring people from just certain particular schools. That's kind of a distraction. So focus on folks accessible to your business. A growth mindset. The whole talk started with the joke about 623 tools to learn, right? There's no specific place that someone's going to be today that guarantees that they're going to be able to meet your needs tomorrow and in the next few years. So you need focus on growth mindset, people that are excited and interested to learn all these new tools. And the attitude in a lot of cases is a lot more important than the credentials, right? That's a whole other topic, but I think we probably know that. Broad critical thinking skills. So again, this is about future proofing, because the future is basically every 15 minutes. That's kind of the problem, in this data space. So if the future is happening every 15 minutes, there isn't a particular tool that's going to solve this problem. What we want are broad critical thinking skills and people who can plausibly do the job. And by that, I don't mean lower your standards to people that can plausibly do the job. What I mean is focus on people who can plausibly do the job and not people who have done the exact job before or who have done have exactly a particular skill profile. It's much easier to find those people, and it's much easier to cultivate them. So how can we do this? In an enterprise, this is going to require some kind of cultural shift. Right, so what we can do, we can steal some ideas from startups and the professions and a few other places. So these are kind of alien ideas maybe for some large enterprises, but they are doable. We'll talk about how to do that. But we're looking at things like getting rid of mass production, resume screening, filtering, that kind of thing. Focusing on skill-based hires and finding people with this growth attitude. And not tool-based solutions, right? That means some hires will be significantly more expensive. That breaks a lot of models, right? There are firms where there is just no way in their current system to hire the people they actually need because the numbers don't line up. So that needs to be addressed. Contractors are okay. So I know a lot of firms are dependent on contractors, but be careful about the contractor placement kind of mafia, right? There's many organizations around placing contractors that can just drive the whole process kind of off a cliff because the incentives are misaligned, let's just say. We don't have time for the details here today, but you probably have some experience with that. It just does not work for anyone except sometimes for the contract placement firms. So beware of that. Hire junior employees and grow them. That is the easiest way to get where you need to go if you're not already kind of in the heart of the technology industry. And create a culture where your employees grow each other, right? So one thing you might be thinking is, hey, wait, this guy is some kind of consultant or instructor. This whole talk is about we're going to hire him and he's going to tell us what to do. No. I don't scale. That's not, hiring me isn't the solution. I mean, it's probably not terrible, but I'm not here to sell myself here. What you really want is your employees you want a culture where your employees are growing each other. And I've seen organizations like that. They're relatively rare, but it's magic, and you can just taste it right away, and you can make incredible progress with a team like that. We do know that cultural shift is notoriously hard. So a few tactics, if you're thinking, well, how do I actually do this? So a couple of concrete tips. Start incrementally. So pick one critical project and start there, obviously, rather than doing everything all at once. Find skunkworks or other groups in your organization that have managed to function outside of the usual rules, right? There's usually something like that. And that kind of connects to the next point here. Meet the people who know the tricks to circumvent obstacles. I don't want to say circumvent rules, but maybe circumvent obstacles. The bigger the organization, in my experience, the more back channels and tricks there are. It's how human organizations evolve. And there's kind of multiple tracks for getting things done. One of the tricky things about remote work, though, is that a lot of these things require trust. They require establishing real relationships. It's not the first time you meet someone when you say, hey, can you put this at the top of the queue because the software doesn't show that we need it next week, but actually we need it next week or we're going to be in a lot of pain. That's not going to happen the first time you meet someone. That's going to happen after you've had lunch with them, 100 times or whatever else, and they know who you are. And everyone knows that they're on the same team. See if there are some kinds of projects that are allowed extra flexibility. So some firms have kind of little carve-outs for certain kinds of activity. It used to be common in certain areas that were referred to as creative. That's kind of moved around a little, but they kind of had special rules. You'd have a boring company that followed all this one set of rules, then you'd walk into this one suite of offices and everything was totally different and magical. And that has its own challenges, but there are sometimes facilities for that. And then sometimes it's even possible or easier to create some new organizational unit, like internal startups or other kinds of ways of carving off an organizational unit rather than trying there's more flexibility in a new unit, let's say, than sometimes with the existing ones. And the goal here is to build this growth culture, right? So one thing that's hard to admit in our world that's based on mass production and automation, but the best learning doesn't scale, at least not yet. Maybe it will with, who knows, with virtual reality or something, but for now, it doesn't work great. So we've got to avoid these kind of traps, which is just throwing at your teams or relying on plentiful information, which has these kind of weaknesses. It's either stale, like out of date, it's weak, so maybe it's accurate, but it doesn't actually get to the scope you need. Camouflaged information, right? It's there, but it's hidden in a huge forest of similar looking stuff that's not what you want. Not very useful. There's lots of wrong information out there, especially with the pace of change. And there's not a lot of incentives for libraries of information that folks are maybe offering you to cull or edit out all of the outdated stuff. It just tends to all just pile up. So these are all reasons why the scaling doesn't work great, and we kind of have to watch out for it. And then the last category here is what I called, kind of semi-jokingly, flex knowledge. This is where you see this on LinkedIn, you see it on social media platforms. This is where someone isn't really trying to help you. What they're really doing is trying to improve their own position or assert themselves as some kind of authority. That's rarely useful because the goal isn't to communicate with you and help you. The goal is to help the person doing the publishing. I think we probably know about some examples of that. But what we wanted to know is, what do the most effective organizations do? Kind of these two pieces. So one is systematic, ongoing internal learning culture. Invest in that: money, food, time, give people space to do it. Encourage people to share what they're learning and learn new things. But you also do need to dip into the outside world every now and again, especially in these large firms, right? So targeted external infusions. And what I mean by that is, so sometimes maybe that is the kind of session that I run in terms of teaching something, but a lot of times it could be going out to meetups, going to conferences like this one that we're at here today. So just, inviting guest speakers from industry or academia. So various ways of bringing in ideas from outside and giving people that synergy between what they're learning in the processes and projects that are embedded in the company, and then what's going on kind of in the outside world. And just to recap where we are here, the entire story, the idea is that to succeed with data, we need to employ, empower, and retain a modest number, but people who are highly skilled, unique, and expensive in individual contributor roles, right? And existing enterprise models are not great at that. That's kind of the story. And so resources are wasted. And if to give you an extra incentive to think about this, it's not just that resources are wasted. Tech companies who are actually really good at doing data and machine learning work can achieve an indirect stranglehold over stuff you need. They insert themselves into your value web, and then they charge you a toll or rent when you need to use that value web, right? So I kind of call this extracting your company's future profits as rent, right? So if it's not just, if you're not excited enough about just doing what you're already doing better, consider that if you don't, there's lots and lots of examples in the last decade of tech companies inserting themselves in somewhere and basically just sucking all the profits out of some sectors. And we can say that's good or bad, but you probably don't want that, and we don't need it. You can probably do that yourself. And we can improve the situation by treating the data mission as critical, so focusing on effectiveness first, avoiding legacy processes that commoditize employees, hire a few exceptional senior folks, hire more junior folks with broad critical thinking skills and a growth mindset. That is absolutely essential. And then constantly improve through ongoing internal learning and targeted infusions of outside knowledge. Things that may appear less efficient to the existing bureaucracy, so the 20th century model, it produces enormous returns when the data projects work. So that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about today. Thanks again for coming. I'll see if there's a question. Is any suggestions on what to ask during interviews to identify if candidates have a growth mindset? So that's a great question. Of course, there's no magic that will, truth detector that will figure this out, but a great way to kind of elicit the information is to have a conversation about situations where someone was taking on a new challenge, and maybe it seemed like it involved some specialized knowledge that they didn't think they were prepared to achieve, and how they dealt with that. Right, because what we want to see is, I can't suddenly become a brain surgeon in 15 minutes, but I could learn probably to stitch up a wound, right? So that's me. I don't know if that's the best example, but the idea is you want to look for situations where someone has had a chance to learn something that was a little bit more challenging and outside of their previous experience, and were they able to, and were they interested in kind of taking that on, figuring out like, what is a realistic increment? Like, I can dress a wound, I can't do brain surgery, and then following through to build up that information and skill. Another question, what do you think about the Agile process? That's a great question, because that's kind of like a trap, right? Agile is kind of one of those mythical things. Like it's like that line about communism where people say, well, people will say, well, it's, people defending communism will say, well, it's never been tried. And I'm not making any argument about communism, but it's one of those things. Agile has almost never really been implemented the way it was envisioned. So most Agile processes they basically reshape Agile to match what the company wants. So I have yet to see a large company that really does Agile. So they do something, and that something doesn't work, and they call it Agile, but it's not that Agile is broken. It's that they've adapted Agile to something that it's not, and then said that it doesn't work. So I guess the takeaway would be Agile will not fix this by itself, because it tends to be kind of twisted or adjusted by the organizations that it's in. So it's not kind of a magic bullet. I guess I could definitely say that. I think we probably would all agree about that part.